Good morning, it's Alex Woods here. I'm a civil litigator and I'm doing a series on PPI and other financial mis-selling products and insolvency as a series following the publication of a guidance note. Now I'm going to deal with three sort of bullet points, three watchwords that I'm going to hang this presentation on this morning, and that is scale, stats and best practice before I come on to my conclusions. Now I'm firstly, by way of an introduction, going to introduce to you an article that appeared in the Times this week. It says fakes, fraud and forgery in bank selling scandal, and this is, if you haven't been following the news, this is the news about the undercover reporter at Lloyds at the Times who went into Royal Mint Court in the city at Lloyds, got a job there as a complaints handler to just see what was going on in terms of what the biggest, by far the biggest mis-seller of payment protection insurance policies was up to in terms of handling complaints, which you'll see why this is relevant when I can come on to my conclusions in the post today. I'm just going to read you a quick extract to give you a flavour of the challenges faced by the service companies that you may instruct if you don't do it in-house in bringing PPI claims against the banks in the first place. So this undercover reporter was being recruited and was being given a pep talk by a contractor, Memento, who were contracted by Deloitte in order to, Lloyd subcontracted the whole PPI complaints operation to Deloitte, who appointed a recruitment company called Memento, who then trained up all their complaints handlers. Not long after our assessment day, about 20 of us were packed into a dingy room in Throgmorton Street, a narrow alley behind the Bank of England. A Memento contractor explained that many customers would simply give up pursuing their complaints after Lloyds rejected them. Let's just say that we defend today 1,000 cases, and that could happen easily, he said. You'll probably find that there'll be a huge chunk of those 1,000 cases. When those letters turn up on the doorstep in the morning, the customer will look at that letter and say, I'm really not happy with that, I'm going to write to the Ombudsman. And then they'll never get round to doing it, ever. There'll be another substantial chunk of those 1,000 who will say, do you know something, I was only trying it on, I didn't think for a minute I'd get my money back, so okay, I'm happy with that. But there will be a vociferous minority who will say, I'm really not happy with that, I'm going to write to the Ombudsman. So it's a numbers game. And they were pretty much trained to, where they at all possibly could, to stall the processing of PPI complaints and, if possible, back the complainants off in the direction of the Financial Ombudsman Service. There's quite an interesting anecdote in there about, well, it's not an anecdote, it's this undercover reporter who says that the chap who was training them said that what you do is you call the consumer, you've got to get their side of the story, you've got their story, which is perfectly proper. You ignore claims management companies and law firms acting on the behalf of consumers. You just phone the consumer. You phone them 3 times during office hours between 9 and 5, and if you're lucky, they won't call you, in which case you then adjudicate the claim without their story. And needless to say, you're probably more likely to adjudicate the claim in the bank's favour. And if you look at the stats that, they do a nice colourful chart in the Times here, the stats are that they, actually rejected most of the claims that they had, and the vast majority of the rejected claims that went to appeal at the Ombudsman Service, around about 80% mark, were reversed. The initial decision of the bank was reversed by the Financial Ombudsman Service upon appeal. Now, I'm going to come on to the audit fee, because I think that the scale of the service company in terms of processing PPI is a key factor in whether or not the costs of realisations are likely to absorb the proceeds, because you do need to be running a reasonably large operation, in my view, because processing PPI in insolvency isn't quite as straightforward as processing PPI. which is what all the claims management companies have been doing for a while now, and some of them, a select few I would say, are now looking obviously, or have already moved into the insolvency area at their peril, because there are complexities with the insolvency area. This is why I would say, in a way, spinning the question round, because you've got to make sure that the service company are doing a proper job and therefore they're properly remunerated. And I think that the last thing you should be thinking of is trying to wheedle a lower fee as you possibly can. I'll come on to best practice as my third point. But the scale of that service company, the scale of the law firm, it's important that they have enough work to actually be able to run the business effectively, because obviously economies of scale is quite important, but it goes without saying. What perhaps doesn't go without saying, and the question that a lot of IPs may have is, well, do I part with an audit fee for this as a Category 1 disbursement? And my answer to you is yes, absolutely you do part with an audit fee. It's entirely appropriate. I mean, I've been down there in an IP's offices and gone through the files, and I've thought, how on earth is the IP not able to charge for the work that they're doing, going through a file, sifting it for payment protection insurance when there's probably quite flimsy data? Now, you can't, unfortunately, charge it as a Category 1. It's just stuck with the modifications, the fixed fee modifications. You can ask for a variation. I think that probably that the IP should be going to the court and asking for variations in order that they can properly charge for processing PPI. But anyway, assuming that's not practical or not affordable, you have got to find that audit fee, I think, to pay to enable the service company to cash flow its operation. And the reason that is so important, in my view, is because I set up and was with a law firm for a year. After I left, I discovered that they weren't processing the PPI very quickly, and they were sort of sitting on large quantities of claims and creating a sort of a bow wave effect of claims and money for the IPs. And they were thinking about putting the plug on the business. Law firm, rather than the claims management company, is likely to have higher overhead. They need that audit fee in order to cash flow their operation, and obviously it's an advance on future realisations. So that's why I say that it's important to make sure that the service company is properly remunerated, to make sure that they're doing a decent job, particularly in the light of the complexities. In terms of the stats issue, I've got some stats here from the second law firm that I consult to. You know, the stats are around about £2,500 per IVA, per PPI claim, and there is an average of a little over 3 PPI claims per IVA. There may perhaps be more. I would think along the lines of perhaps more going forward once you've really, really properly mined the data for the number of the value of the mis-selling products that are being sold on their individual debts. So they're probably likely to be more rather than less. So that's £7,500. So take off the 30%. Maybe you're doing it with the claims management company for 25%. Anyway, you reduce that figure down to 5. That's the amount of realisations that go into the IVA, and presumably you're taking your 15% of that. So you're down to 4,250. So it's not a huge amount of money per IVA, but it probably is sufficient for you to feel obligated to start processing the stuff. And don't forget that, as a guidance note points out, you're certainly going to be using a service company that is on a no-win, no-fee basis, and the audit fee, relatively small, will be as an advance, will be refunded out of realisations. So it's difficult to see. I will come on to some headaches in a minute, but it's difficult to see purely on the stats why or how it is that the costs of the operation are likely to exceed the realisations. Another point of note here is that, here I've got one claim for one client, one of their single claim, one of the three, for 14,265. That's the amount of the PPI claim, total amount of the PPI claim. So you could potentially be looking at, if you ignore the IVAs, you ignore them at the peril, because there may be one IVA that's got a large amount of money. By the same token, there'll be some that don't have any. And I would also add, I've mentioned this in a posting previously, but my view is that there is potentially much larger amount of money, and these claims aren't having proper amounts of interest. In particular, is my particular beef with the way the banks are now handling the PPI complaints, is that they aren't properly compensating the client by multiplying their payment protection insurance refund by the same credit card compound interest factor in the case of credit cards, or in the case of fixed term loans where the client also has a credit card, particularly where they have a credit card with the same bank. And that therefore, and I'm starting to, with the claims management company that I consult to, we're starting to go back to the banks and tell them that they're not paying the clients enough. So, I think purely on the stats, purely on the and providing that the service company is a sufficient scale, and because of the previous mentioned points, I don't think there's an argument here. Where I do think there's more of an argument that the costs might likely exceed the realisations is where the relationship between the insolvency practitioner and the service company isn't a strong one, and I'll just allude to two sort of factors there that I think are relevant and I talk from experience. The first thing is an insolvency practitioner is not going to properly realise these assets unless they are committed to empowering the service company to do their job by requiring the debtors to return the packs and return the completed questionnaires, and basically to cooperate. And you have to be quite firm. You have to be very firm with some debtors in order to get every pack returned, because 60% return rate is a lot less of realisations, and see what that does to your the £5,000 figure I referred to earlier. It's going to get and it could be less. Our experience is a lot of people reply immediately, 50%, and then a lot of people need chasing. So that's the first thing, and that's not necessarily you having to do work on a phone, but you making sure that you're sending nasty letters to debtors if they're not complying, and also that you're giving the service company sufficient latitude to do secondary traces of your debtor clients themselves as your agents. So I think that's important, and that brings me on to the second point, which is from the service company side, is that they have got to be sufficiently experienced, in my view, to handle the complexity, because this is not bog standard PPI. There'll be lots of benefits with the claims management company doing this work, because they may be more efficient, lower overheads, and actually, frankly, more experienced than law firms. Don't think a law firm is the answer to your dreams in every single case, because some law firms have got thirsty overheads and they've got a lot of red tape. But nevertheless, they have the advantage of, where it comes to the complexity and obviously the legal angle, they're your man. But I would make sure that the service that wasn't true with one law firm I know, but there are always exceptions to the rule, aren't there? So you've got to make sure, whoever you're dealing with, that they have sufficient experience, sufficient balls to take unilateral decisions on your individual IVAs. That no, we're not accepting set-off because this particular IVA is a 2008 standard terms and conditions comply. Unfortunately, this is a small amount of money. it's about to close, you're wasting your time trying to process PPI in this particular case. These sorts of individual questions are key, and I speak from the pain of experience, are key in making sure that the operation is handled, administered effectively and efficiently. So and in a way you've got to find the right service company who's going to process the claims, because as I said, in one case the law firm's just pushing basically the claims forward in time, such that and the insolvency petitioners weren't pressuring the debtors to get the packs completed and to cooperate, and this lazy approach to it all, as if it would kind of do it itself, just meant that the cash was being pushed down the track, and that business very close to pulling the plug, because it was just having to cash flow an operation and it wasn't generating returns. And I allude once more to this Times article, because the banks ain't stupid. They know that if they can throw a bit of a spanner in the works, they're obviously focusing on the bottom line. They're morally neutral creatures, and they're told Deloitte to get away with as little as possible in terms of spend on PPI. It was 9 billion, it's now 25 billion, and Deloitte are doing the bidding of their masters and trying to cut costs, and then Momenta are trying to please Deloitte and trying to cut costs, and that's when fraud creeps into the system. So to conclude, I think you want to make sure that the service company that you use, I'm assuming you're doing it in-house. The service company that you're using is sufficient size, perhaps not massive, because I know one claims management company that was very big and ran into problems, and I was told about a huge pile of relatively complex PPI claims that were just sitting in a room abandoned. That would make the hair stand on the back of an IP as far as getting in trouble with this regulator is concerned. So I think there's got to be a sufficient scale, and cash flowed by a payment of an audit fee. And I think that the money is there. The payment is definitely there, and there can only be more money there, but it's got some level of best practice has got to be. I was about to say baked into the cake. Is an important ingredient in making sure that the PPI processing operation is run as quickly as it possibly can, efficiently as it possibly can, and is extracting the maximum value that it possibly can from these financially missold products. This whole PPI scandal for me has been about, and I've struggled because everyone wants to generate money in turnover at the expense of taking care in terms of best practice, and for my money in not being sufficiently aggressive in litigating claims, which you have to do for a morally neutral beast, to be fair. In order for best practice to work, it is about obtaining the maximum return from mining the vein of gold to its maximum. I had a jokey video where I bit into an apple and threw the rest away. And I think it's important that whatever service company that you have instructed, that you should ensure that they are eating that apple down to the core and as quickly as possible. Okay, many thanks. I look forward to speaking to you shortly, where I'll post part 6 of the series and talk more about the nitty-gritty of which companies you should be using to process your PPI.